As follows. First, welcoming speech from the Dean of Faculty of Education of UIII. Second, speech from Director of Australian Council for Educational Research, ACER Indonesia. Third, public lecture with the topic The Learning Progression with Dr. Jarrod Hingston, and it will be moderated by Dr. Destina Wahyu Winarti. And now, it's time to move to our first agenda, a welcoming speech from the Dean of the Faculty of Education of UIII, Prof Nina Nurmila, PhD. For you, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Respective guests, lecturers, students, and some of the guests are from Madaniya School, Amanah Cendekia, and other schools that Iin has mentioned. I would like to welcome Dr. Jarrod Hingston, the director of the School and Early Childhood Education Services. Thank you very much for coming. Also, the director of ACER Indonesia, Mariam Kartika Tresni. Thank you very much, Ibu, for coming. So I would like to welcome all of you. All of you, yeah, from ACER who have already come to UIII. I would like to introduce UIII is the newly established university. Actually, this university was founded in 2016. Our rector was appointed as a rector in 2019. And then in September 2021, we operated. We started with the first MA in education, consisting of 20 students, and they are now just finished their thesis defense. So I think this is a healing time for them. Freedom, congratulations to all the students, batch 1 who have completed on time as we expect, yeah. And then the second batch, we have opened the PhD. We have 10 PhD students in the first batch, but in the second year. And then we have 17 MA in education, yeah, for the second batch. UIII has 4 faculties, the Faculty of Islamic Studies, the Faculty of Social Science, Faculty of Economic and Business, and Faculty of Education. And we are all here from the Faculty of Education. Yeah. Okay, I think, Dr. Jarrod Hingston is from Australia, and many of us also graduated from Australia, yes, like Ibu Destina, Pak Bambang, and I myself like spent like 8 years in Australia for my MA in Murdoch University, a PhD in the University of Melbourne, and then I continued by doing research in University of Technology Sydney and then University of Western Sydney. So Australia is like my second home. So we are looking forward after the lecture to have the meeting with you to discuss a possible collaboration that we can make. I think without further ado, I would like I'm looking forward to listening to your speech, yeah, Dr. Jarrod Hingston, about learning progression concept. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof Nina, for the very warm welcoming speech. It is now our pleasure to invite Director of ACER Indonesia, Ibu Mariam Kartika Tresni, for giving the speech. For Ibu Mariam, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. Very good morning. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes, I know some people do that just to keep the spirits up, but that was actually an honest mistake. So good afternoon. Yeah. So good afternoon. Very happy to be here, and thank you so much to Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia for having us here. We hope that this would be a start of a great collaboration in the future. So thank you so much. So thank you, Ibu Professor Nina Nurmila, PhD, Dean of the Faculty of Education, and also Pak Bambang Sumitono, PhD, for arranging all of this with our team. So we're very happy to be here today. So because we are very passionate about helping the education improvements in Indonesia and in what we can do, especially around the area of assessments and the progressive learning that you will see today and shared by our speaker, Dr. Jarrod Hingston, our Director for School and Early Childhood Education Services from the Australian Council for Educational Research, our global office in Melbourne. So we're also very happy for him to be here. So thank you for coming, Jarrod. And I'm glad that we are able to be here and share with all of you who are here. I know this is an offline, but also online. Is that correct? Yes. So also those watching from the online, I hope we'll all be able to find some benefit from what we'll be listening today. Just a little bit before we start, I know everybody's probably interested in what Jarrod was about to say, but I think I'll just share a little bit about the ACER in Indonesia. We've been in Indonesia around 5 years, but ACER Indonesia, ACER has supported the development of education in Indonesia for the past 35 years. And of course, the ACER Global has been around longer than that. And I think Jarrod will tell you a little bit more about that. So we are established a long time ago. And the one in Indonesia, especially in the past 35 years, we've been supporting the Ministry of Education in general. And also, we are here to collaborate with the leaders of the education system, but also to support the organizations that help shape policy in the education sector, and also especially the schools and the private sector who are wanting to enhance their practices in education. So to do all of that, we have done technical advising, we've done research, and we've done also provision of assessments that later on, maybe you'll hear more about our assessments that we've done. One of it is the progressive achievement test and the progressive achievement approach that you'll hear more about today. But I think what's mostly important is that we are able to provide evidence-based information to improve the learning outcomes and the learning of each individual students. So we are very excited to be able to share that with you today. And we have been working with the ministry closely. We also are developing tools and assessments especially for the Indonesian students, because what we have is in Bahasa Indonesia, some of them, but we also have many assessment tools that are not only in Bahasa Indonesia, but also that is set up for the international student body. So I think without waiting too long, I'd like to end this and thank you once again for having us here, and we hope to see future collaborations again together. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for Ibu Mariam Kartika Tresni. Now we move to the main agenda, which is public lecture session with our keynote speaker, Dr. Jarrod Hingston. He is a director of the School and Early Childhood Education Service of ACER Indonesia. The discussion will be moderated by our lecturer, Dr. Destina Wahyu Winarti. For the speaker and also the moderator, the floor and times are yours. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I hope everyone in a good condition, happy to join this session. Okay, that's good. We just finished our evaluation, get a feedback, and students also already share their thought about this last semester that we have gone through. And now we have a very great keynote speaker today, Mr. Jarrod. So today we have ACER coming to our campus specifically. Actually, this is not the first time we encounter each other. Previously in Bali, I think there's a session, a conference, and IIIU also went there with Pak Bahrul Hayat. So it's really great opportunity for ACER to come here and share with us. And of course, it's going to be a great opportunity for our students, future educators, people who are going to work in a field of education that are going to hear from you. But before that, let me read a little bit of the profile of Dr. Jarrod Hingston, or Jarrod Hingston, PhD, for exact. All right, I'm just reading the profile that's given to me. I'm not memorizing it exactly. So Dr. Jarrod Hingston is ACER's Director of School Assessment Service based in ACER head office in Melbourne. So anyone going to Melbourne? Supriyono? Yes, you know that. All right, in this role, he oversees 30 of ACER programs and projects. Dr. Hingston has 20 years of experience in project delivery, students assessment, and government policy and practice. So very extensive experience and really good opportunity for students and other from education agency to explore today and get more insight from him. Get the whole things asked questioned. All right, so prior to joining to ACER, so before become the director in ACER, he headed to Abu Dhabi Education Council Student Assessment and Examination Division, managing government school examination and reporting, national assessment programs, including the external measurement of student achievement, or EMSA, and the implementation and analysis of the program for international student assessment, or PISA, that everyone very familiar with it. Also themes, trends in mathematics and science study, and the progress in international reading literacy study, or PIRLS. More recently, Dr. Hingston worked in the Victorian Department of Education and Training as a policy advisor for transitioning Victorian schools to online, national, and classroom assessment. So that's a bit of a background of Dr. Jarrod Hingston, and without further ado, let's hear his lecture. Just a bit of structure of today's presentation. Mr. Jarrod Hingston will have 45 minutes to present, and then we're going to follow it with a question and answer for 25 minutes. Time is yours.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Professor Nina. Thank you for the distinguished colleagues at this wonderful university. It's such a pleasure to be here. I wasn't expecting to come to such a new, modern, vibrant university. It was such an experience to walk into this beautiful campus and to meet so many very interesting people so far. I know we'll be talking a lot more today, but also to be at a postgraduate university. I think there's postgraduate, I've been to many universities around the world, and there's always something special about universities that focus on postgraduate studies, because they're the research hubs, they're the ones that can drive change in society. And so it's just really such an honor to be here today. So thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about assessment, so educational assessment. So do we have any, I know we've got some faculty in the room, but do we have any school teachers here or people who have been teaching in schools? Yes, wonderful. Okay, very good. So we've got, so hopefully a lot of the things we have to say today will resonate with you. There's an information pack, or the slide pack, that you can actually access via this QR code. So if you are interested in that, we'll just give you a moment to scan the QR code. So much better for the environment, the QR code, than printing lots of paper. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about ACER, the Australian Council for Educational Research. So we're non-government, we're an independent, not-for-profit research organisation. We are one of the largest employers of educational researchers in the world. And our expertise is very much in educational measurement. So whilst we do a lot of policy research, we're looking at everything from an educational measurement perspective. So we're talking a bit today about what our approaches that are based on our research, and approaches that we know work because we have extensive research and experience behind those approaches. Now, the ACER was originally founded in 1930, so we've been in existence for 93 years. There was an interesting story how we were first founded. So we're talking about educational exchanges and exchanging knowledge and furthering the mission of education. Well, we were actually founded by the Carnegie Foundation from the United States. They, in the early 1930s, they had identified some countries in the world that they thought needed a body that specialized in educational research. One of those was Australia, so they sent a delegation to Australia to meet with the Australian government, which was only 25 years old then. And they said, we're going to give you some money, but you have to create an independent education research organisation. So from that, the Australian Council for Educational Research was born. Now, a lot of the other grants they gave around the world, those organisations were started and are no longer in existence. But for us, we've grown. So they were right. Australia needed an organisation that focused on educational research. But what we found over the years as we've grown is that the world needs educational research, and we need to be working collaboratively in different parts of the world to make education better globally. This is very important. So we're now an organisation with over 500 staff. We have offices all around Australia. We also have an office in India, an office in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, the United Arab Emirates, and we're very proud to have an office in Jakarta. So you'll meet some of our colleagues here today. So our mission is to improve learning. It's as simple as that. But our agenda in improving learning is about creating evidence and creating tools and programs that actually help teachers and educators and governments improve learning through using evidence. And that evidence comes from our educational measurement expertise. So we do a lot of work from all stages of education. Most of the work that I do is in schools. We do have people who work more in higher education and in university level. We have people who work in vocational and professional areas. We also do some work in early childhood, but most of the work we'll be talking about today is related to schools. So the challenges in education, a lot of them are common wherever you are in the world. So everybody wants for their children a better educational experience than what they had. And that's everywhere I've worked in the world. That is very common. But how? How do we give our children a better educational experience than what we had? And how are our children going to give their children a better one? This is the question that is burning inside all of us. That's why we're here today. So for ACER, we're putting a lot of our resources and a lot of our focus on trying to work with people like yourselves to answer that question. And a lot of the ways we do that is through looking at particularly assessment and educational measurement, curriculum, and things like being able to measure progress, which is what we're here talking about today. So our ACER Indonesia office, so you've just met Ms. Mariam, who's our director. We also have with us today Ms. Raisa, who's going, many of you will get to know who are interested in progressive achievement. She's our progressive achievement expert in Indonesia. But we have an office here because as an organisation, we've been working with Indonesia for over 30 years. And why wouldn't we be? We're all neighbours, we're all friends, we all have common goals in education. It's very important to us, the Indonesia office, and the relationships that we can build with Indonesia, because just as we hope that you'll learn from us today, we're here to learn from you. And I know a lot of our researchers work in Indonesia, and there's a lot of mutual benefit for all of us. So our program, our strategy for the next 5 years and beyond is really in 3 phases. We're really looking at being able to help lead reform. Now, I've had the privilege of hearing some of your government, your Department of Education leaders talk about the Merdeka Belajar reform. This is such a wonderful focus of reform and such an ambitious reform, and really that's something that we hope to assist with. Shaping policy, to take evidence and help government and help schools and help educators set policies around, particularly around student learning is such an area that we're very passionate about. And enhancing practice. If we can't help teachers become better teachers and we can't help students become better students, how are we going to fulfill that mission of improving learning? So this is a big focus of ours. We have a number of major projects that we work on internationally, but some of them that may be of interest, where we do work on the program for international student assessment, PISA, which is what many people know of. I know that Indonesia is a big participant in PISA. Well, we do a lot of the development of the assessment frameworks, of the assessments themselves, of the analysis. So it's something that we work with, but we also do a big area as well as our progressive achievement. which we're going to talk about today. So first of all, like, why does assessment matter? Assessment is so important in education because it's an opportunity for students to demonstrate what it is that they can do. It's an opportunity for us to celebrate what students can do and what they've achieved and what they are achieving. But there's also another side to assessment, which can be a negative side to assessment, which is when we start to judge and say the student's results are not as good as we expected. If a student's results are not as good as we expected, we have to find a way to help them. And so our approach to assessment is that you shouldn't be doing lots and lots of assessment, but what we should be doing is really good assessment. And by really good assessment, that means assessment where we can gather information, gather evidence, where we can actually help improve the student's learning and what the student can do. So a lot of schools, just in Australia and around the world, they ask us, well, what actually matters in assessment? We know assessment matters, but what matters in assessment? So the first part is you need to have a clear purpose for assessment. And today I'm going to talk about the types of assessment, the educational measurement tools that we develop. But there's lots of types of assessment. So there's everything from observation in the classroom, where teachers will be seeing whether a student can demonstrate that they can do something, and then they'll be providing feedback and help to them. There's quizzes, there's essays, there's project-based learning. There's lots and lots of ways we can assess. But today we're going to be talking about the types of assessments that our researchers develop. So they're really, first of all, in three broad categories, three broad purposes. The first one is selection. So this is where, particularly for a university, a school that is looking for a selective school that is looking for the smartest students, what they will regularly do is have some sort of assessment, some sort of test, where they're trying to identify who the smartest, who the most gifted students are out of a group of students. So that's a selection test. They're really trying to discriminate between good, better, best. Certification. So this is very much the type of assessment we tend to do in languages, but also in professional areas where you're trying to evaluate who has reached a minimum level of competency in something. So you want to be able to say this person is a level 1 in this language, or this person is has this standard of literacy or numeracy. So this is a certification test. Now, so often we're doing in education systems, when students are doing, they go through their primary schooling and their secondary schooling, at the end of that, we're giving them selection tests to enter universities. We're also giving them certification tests to say that you've achieved your end of secondary schooling. But in the years prior to that, what we need to be focusing on is achievement assessments. So achievement is trying to understand what is the level that a student has attained during his or her learning journey. What is it that they've learned and been able to do? Sorry. So one of the, I'm glad it wasn't just me hearing that. So, so this is one of this picture here. I've been using for around 15 years. I love it because this is in achievement assessments. This is the big mistake that's often made. we have the monkey, the penguin, the elephant, the fish in a fish bowl, the seal and the dog. And then we have the assessor sitting up the front. My children tell me that that's me, but it's not actually me. Anyway, the assessor is saying, we're going to have a fair test. So we're going to give you all the same test, just to be fair. You're all going to climb that tree. So we know that most of those animals are not going to be able to climb the tree. Most of them are not even going to be able to attempt to climb the tree. So we actually don't learn anything about what those animals can do. Now the monkey will be able to climb the tree in seconds and probably swing to another tree. So we know that the tree climbing is too easy for the monkey. So we don't learn what it is that the monkey, what deficiencies, what areas the monkey needs to learn next. So while there's a little bit of a joke to this, so often in education, we do this to students. We give them a test and we say, this test is fair because everybody has to sit it. If it's a selection test, if it's a certification test, I agree. You keep it fair. You tell them this is the type of thing that's going to be on the test. You have to study for that. But what about when we're trying to help improve the learning of the student? Why would we get them all to climb a tree? What you need to say is, we need a test that gets the picture of what the student can do and what they need to learn next. This is educational measurement. Not giving a test for the sake of giving a test. We need evidence about how we can help the student. So the way that we start to do that is by basing an assessment on a construct. So a construct is the way that we look at a particular learning area and we look at what we value, how we describe that learning area, and what ability looks like in that learning area. So what we want to do is to find out what students can and can't do in that learning area. The way we do that, first of all, is we create a definition. So we define the domain that we're assessing. It could be mathematics, it could be reading, it could be playing the piano. But then we describe in our definition, how do you demonstrate ability? In mathematics, we know that there's types of areas in mathematics. In playing a piano, we know that there's keys that they need to be able to use. But then we start defining what the skills are. And we also need, as a part of the definition, we need to explain to ourselves why we value this. Why is this important? Then the next part is the structure. So how are we going to actually assess the students? Are we going to give them a test, as in a quiz or an exam? Are we going to, if so, are we going to make it multiple choice test? If so, why? Are we going to make it an open response or an essay? Are we going to make it a performance? And so then we need to think about how we measure the construct, how we measure that. So for example, if we're going to measure the construct of mathematics, we wouldn't generally give a performance-based test. We wouldn't necessarily tell the students, although mathematics is really important when you're trying to build a house, the carpenter needs to know their right angles and they need to be able to measure and things like that. In the classroom, we wouldn't tell students to go and measure, to go and build a house so we can assess their mathematics because it's impractical. But then if we're assessing ability or achievement in playing the piano, we wouldn't give them a multiple choice test. We'd actually get them to perform. So this is where we think about the structure. The content, what is it that we actually want to assess? What are the skills? What are the areas of that domain that we need to measure. So what we would typically do then is identify those skill areas, those content areas, and then we would use this to identify what types of questions or items, as I prefer to call them, what types of items we need to develop to be able to assess each of those content strands or processes. Then there's also cognitive proficiencies. We know as humans we have ways of thinking. There's certainly in areas of these domains, there's cognitive processes such as problem solving, applying, recalling, interpreting. Even in mathematics, things like fluency, that matters. You know, can you recite your times tables quickly, or do you have to sit there and count on your fingers? So there's lots of cognitive proficiencies that we also need to define in a good construct. And then there's contexts. This is really important because there's generally two types of contexts that we use. First type of context is an abstract context. That's where we just have the question and we're assessing knowledge in that question. So it could be something like 10 times 10. What does that equal? There's no other information there, just the equation 10 times 10. But then there's practical contexts. And this is areas that are really important, particularly when we're talking about higher order thinking skills. So what we might do is say if we have 10 apples in a basket and 10 baskets, how many apples do we have? So this is actually putting the same equation into a practical context. Now that's sort of a little bit like a classroom type context, also a worded problem in a classroom type context, but we have other assessments where we will also use real life contexts. So it could be something like providing a news article with a graph and then saying, from this graph, how many apples can you see are in the person is talking about in the article? Or if you need to load a truck to have a certain weight of apples, how many apples do you need? Something like that, where you're actually challenging the student to apply their mathematical knowledge to a real life concept. So the construct, we develop our construct, but it's so important that we could measure it. So there's lots of great, I've seen over the years, lots of great constructs defined, but you can't measure it. So going back to the example of playing the piano, will really answering a multiple choice test, will that actually really measure how well somebody plays the piano? No. Will building a house, a student building a house, will that really answer the questions about how competent a student is in algebra, statistics? No. The other piece is that when we're actually developing an assessment, we need to get the complete picture of that construct. Now, what we'll show you in a few moments is how we develop our assessments against a scale, against a measurement scale that is common across different grade levels and different stages of education. And so what that means is that we can actually measure learning growth. We can actually measure a student's learning journey over a lot of years. But what we do is with that scale, we have different stages of assessment that we're giving teachers the tools to evaluate. So that way, the idea is you get a complete picture of students at particular levels of their education. We're not going to give students a single assessment that looks at 10 years of education. We want to target where they're at in their learning and try and understand what their next steps are, not what their steps are in 5 years' time. So this is getting a complete picture of where the student is and what they need to learn next. So I've worked in a lot of different countries and there's something very common is that a lot of education systems tend to focus on a grade level curriculum and assess students around that curriculum. That's fine. That's a completely acceptable practice. But when we're talking about a student as either meeting the standards of that curriculum or exceeding them, or not achieving the standards of that curriculum, what we're actually doing is creating a bit of a problem for ourselves. Because all we're doing is we're assuming that the learning, that learning journey is just discrete to that year level. We know that in any particular classroom, there can be students who are very highly skilled, very advanced, and then you'll have a lot of students in the middle, and then you'll have students who are a long way behind. Our research suggests that there can be 5 or 6 years difference in ability of the best student and the weakest student in a classroom. This makes teaching pretty tough. But when we're just analysing all of these students against a single grade's curriculum, it makes it even tougher, because chances are the brightest students are actually needing to do work and concepts from maybe grade 5, 6, even 7. The weaker students haven't learned some of the concepts, some of the skills from the previous grade levels, and they need help maybe with some concepts from grade 2, grade 3 to be able to catch up. So this is what learning actually looks like. It's an accumulation, it's a journey. And all of our research keeps telling us that. It's an accumulation, and you'll know yourselves. So sometimes the grade 3 student is actually at the same, as advanced as the grade 4 student and needs to be doing some more advanced work. Sometimes the grade 5 student in grade 3. So how do we do that when we're just assessing students on grade 4 curriculum? The way that we support teachers to do that is by defining what long-term progress looks like. So we do that numerically, so quantitatively, and we do that qualitatively. So what you can see here is an example of a scale. So this is an ordinal scale. We have, hopefully the pointer to see it. So it starts at number 1 being the first level, the least complex level, and goes all the way up to 14, which is the most complex level. And what we create alongside the numbers is a progress map. So our researchers will identify what are the simpler skills and concepts, and which level do they align with. So for example, this is an aspect of reading, and we can see level 1 is notice print. So that's just seeing letters. 2 is recognise familiar print, and so on. Up to 14, which is interrogate complex texts. So these are stages that we can measure and also describe what the types of abilities are at each of those stages. So this is a progress map. When we assess against a progress map, we can identify which level a student is at. So we can see here that we've got the yellow star there, which signifies a student is at level 7. And we can see that level 7 is make simple interpretations of simple texts. When we have a progress map, we can also identify the skills that the student needs to learn next. What we can also do is identify how the student has progressed. So if we've assessed them 12 months before or 6 months before in this particular domain, we can see how much they've progressed over time. Now our research tells us that this is a very important thing for students. We all like in our jobs, in our lives, we all like to know that we've achieved something, don't we? Who here doesn't care if they've achieved anything? Yeah? None of you care if you've achieved anything? We all care. We all care. But sometimes the way that we're assessed doesn't communicate to us what we've achieved, but we think it's really important. So in a lot of education systems, we will judge students and report back to parents that they're an A, B, C, D or E student, or maybe a percentage. So a student in grade 4 could be C or 60%, then grade 5, C, 60%, then grade 6, C, 60%. All that tells the student is that they stayed at the same level. But the student hasn't stayed at the same level, have they? They've actually gone and done a different grade level, and so they've actually advanced in their learning. They've had 2 full years of learning, but we're not, just by using the C's or the 60%, we're not actually communicating to them what they've progressed in. So what we believe is very important is being able to communicate to students and to parents how they've progressed, how they've improved. It's very important to all our intrinsic motivations to be able to have that satisfaction. So the way that we do that, we use a numerical scale, and at a specific point in time, we measure their progress against that numerical scale. And then as we keep assessing the students with tools that use the same numerical scale, we can actually then demonstrate their progress numerically and also qualitatively. So this here is an example of the type of numerical scale that we will develop. So you can see that it goes below 65 and goes above 170. Now there's a bunch of lines, distributions in there that say grade 1, year 1, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, all the way up to grade 10. So so this is educational measurement. This is what we develop tools that will enable us to have a grade 1, a grade 2, a grade 3, grade 4 test, and so on. And we can actually measure students against the same scale. So this uses a psychometric technique called Roche analysis. This is one that's used by a few agencies like us around the world who specialize in educational measurement. But what it means is that you can have different test forms and they all report against the same measurement scale. So you can actually then compare students' scores over time. As we can see there, we've got an example of a student who's around about the average mark in their grade level every year, but we can actually see how they've progressed over many years. The other thing that's so important to us, and you'll know from your own studies, is feedback. When you're trying to demonstrate you can do something, you want to know what it is that you can, how you've been assessed, how well you've done, and you want the feedback quickly so you know what you need to do to improve, what your next steps are. So we believe in that as well. And so our assessments, our achievement assessments, most of them have automatic reporting. So a student does the assessment, the teacher straight away can get the report and to start working with the student, provide feedback, say, this is how we can help you. So this is what we call the progressive achievement approach. This is what our research tells us works. So there's really 3 parts to this. And when I explain them to you, you'll probably think, okay, this makes sense, but not all assessments can do this. So it's really important that we, that the assessment is developed in the way that we do this. So often people make the assessment the priority. The assessment is not the priority, the student is. The student is the center of this. But the assessment is what we use to gather evidence. So this is the first part. It's the evidence of learning. And then the reporting from the assessment will tell us where the student is at in his or her learning journey. So this is really, really important. The assessment isn't the main thing, it's just the evidence gathering tool. But then, this is the bit that I think wherever I've seen school systems where sometimes it gets forgotten. So often teachers will look at the assessment and say, okay, the student is doing well, they're not doing as well as I'd hoped, and then the assessment goes away. But what we're saying is use the evidence then to support the next steps. Identify what the next steps in a student's learning is, and then you teach to those next steps. So if the student, if the evidence is saying this grade 4 student needs to relearn something from grade 3, then you teach them that concept from grade 3. If the evidence is saying that this student is well above grade 4 and their next step in learning is something from grade 5, then you give them some grade 5 work. You give them some more advanced work. Then the third part is tracking progress. So this is where we use our scale to be able to measure learning growth and to explain how to the student, how they've progressed over a year or half a year. So these are the types of reports that we provide for students, where we have evidence in numerical style, so they can see the types of how they perform on each. It's mathematics in this example. We can see that they've, the green symbolizes correct responses, the red incorrect responses. But the circles and squares that are at the bottom of the screen, they're easier questions to answer. The higher up you go, the more difficult the questions are to answer. So what this does is give teachers an opportunity to look and see quantitatively what are the strengths and weaknesses of the student. So we can see in the first case that we've got geometry, the student is performing pretty well in geometry. The second one is measurement. Again, the student is performing pretty well. Third one, number. We've got some red boxes down towards the bottom of the screen. That means that the teacher needs to do some focusing on number with that student. We also have some text on the side there, which is actually, if we go back to our progress map, this is actually describing the types of skills and concepts and abilities that students at that level typically demonstrate. So it's just not about number, it's also about describing what learning looks like for students at that level of ability. When we're talking about supporting the next steps, we've just seen from that last slide that the teacher already has identified some areas of improvement for the student, but they can also look at the descriptions of the higher level of ability and start to set some learning targets for those students. We also believe that professional learning and teaching resources are important for teachers as well, to support them with that work. And tracking progress is really important. So all of our assessments have detailed reports showing how students have performed over time, how they've progressed in their learning, and how we can describe that progress. So we have lots of different assessments that we've developed using the progressive achievement approach as its basis. So that way schools can actually access these. They don't have to create them themselves. They can use them in 40 minutes. The students can be assessed. Within an hour, teachers can be starting to work with students on their strengths and weaknesses and talking to them about the progress that they've made. So we have assessments in mathematics, in reading, in spelling, in grammar, in science, lots of different areas. We know this works, and so do educators, because in the last 10 years, we've gone from having 1 million students sit our assessments to 6 million students sit our assessments. This is in Australia and around the world. We also know that in Australia, we have 2/3 of Australian schools using our approach. Now, this is interesting because there is a mandated national test in Australia. So the idea the government has always said, that's enough. But schools have said, no, the national test is really good for government, but it's not really a teacher's tool. But schools and school systems are using our assessments. They're choosing to use our assessments, not because they're told to, but because they wish to. So because they can see that this is a tool for teachers. Now, what we're really excited to inform you about today is that there's actually this tool available in Indonesia. It's called Pat Mathematica, and that is delivered in Bahasa. So schools in Indonesia can actually be using the progressive achievement approach, and they can be assessing mathematics in Bahasa. So it's something we're very excited about. And if you are interested to know more about this, please come and speak with myself or Miss Raisa after the session. So we're at a university, and it's a postgrad university, so you're all interested in research. Okay, so let's talk about the research behind this approach. So I've been talking a lot about scales. So I'm going to sort of identify how we develop the scale. So, but the idea of the scale is that we can measure learning journeys of students over a number of years, and we can measure them against a common ruler, a common measurement tool. They can do different assessments and be measured against that common construct. We can also measure groups of students over time, so we can look at the average achievement of groups. And this again is an example of the achievement levels of, well, this is actually schools in Australia against our PAT, that's our PAT maths, so our progressive achievement mathematics assessment. So we can see there that there's progress across the years, but there's actually a lot of overlap. So if we actually look at something like along here, 115, we can see the very brightest of students in year 1 and year 2 are able to get 115 on the scale. And then if we go along year 6, year 5, year 6, it's probably the average student. It's getting 115. And then as we go through year 9 and year 10, these are the students who are really struggling, who are still getting 115. So it's interesting. The abilities of students, okay, they may not be doing the same types of work, but the actual mathematical ability of students is comparable across different year levels. This is where the research is powerful. So how do we create a scale? What we do is we have our construct, and then we have these wonderful researchers who their skill is actually developing test items, test questions that align to the construct. So what they will do, they might create 400 or 500 test questions against the construct. Then we will package them up into into test forms, so maybe 40 questions, and we will send them out to schools and have students in schools sit those tests. And then we give those data to another set of researchers that we have, psychometricians, who their expertise is in quantifying achievement. And what they will do, they will use the Roche analysis, this psychometric analysis technique, to first of all, rank order the difficulty of the items. So we can see here down the bottom of the screen, all these numbers, the numbers each represent a different item or test question. So down the bottom of the screen, we have 16, 21, 60. These are the 3 easiest questions that have been administered in the schools. Up the top, we have 209, 213. They're the 2 hardest questions that have been administered. So everything in between is of increasing difficulty. Now, the wonderful thing about this psychometric technique is that on the same scale, we measure the difficulty of the test questions and we estimate the ability of the students in that domain. So each of these X's represents the score of a student. So what we can see here is that there's the lowest performing students and there's a lot of students in the middle. And then up the very top, we start to get the highest performing students. Now, when we develop a scale, there will be students usually from grade 2 to grade 10 sitting these tests. So within that, you'll generally have your grade 2s, your grade 3s, your grade 4s, your grade 5s and 6s, all the way up to 10. But in each grade level, there'll be a lot of overlap between the students. And then there'll be some students who are from higher grade levels who are further towards the middle because they're struggling with their grade level. And in the lower grade levels, you'll have some students who are around the middle because they're very, very smart. So this is how we start to be able to develop a scale that we can then measure achievement over time. So then our psychometricians will then assign numbers to that scale. So usually somewhere around, they might say, let's say 50 up to 200, something like that, with 200 being the highest achieving and 50 at the lowest. So we've got a numerical value around that. But then our test development researchers, what they will ask the psychometricians to do is to say, can you break the scale up into levels? And the psychometricians will sit there and they'll play with the numbers and they'll say, yes, this is where we think we can break the scale up. And then our test developers will go back and they will look at each of those levels and the test questions that sit in each of those levels. So we can see here, we've got the lowest level here. We've got a bunch of test questions. Now, if we think back to the construct, each of those test questions are assessing a skill or a concept. So then what our test developers will do is they will look at those concepts and they will say, okay, well, these are the types of skills that the students are showing at this level. And then they'll look at the next level and they'll see that there's an advancement in the types of skills and abilities. And then the next level, there's again an advancement. There might be some new areas, like things like algebra will tend to sort of start to come. They'll start to see algebra questions maybe at a 3rd or 4th level. And so from what they're doing then, they're building a progress map, a really sophisticated progress map, or what we like to call learning progressions, because this is showing the levels, the progression of learning across the continuum. So this is how we could then report back numerical results, but also qualitative results. We can actually explain what learning looks like at different parts of the learning journey. So this is progressive achievement. So here's an example of our levels. And then when the students sit the assessment, they will then be placed into the most appropriate level based on their achievement. And then there's the description of what they can do. So here's an example for reading. We've got reflecting on the text. So that's for the 90 to 99 band. there's a description there on that particular skill about what those students are generally showing. So the assumption is that when a student has achieved around the top of a band, is that they've demonstrated most of the skills in that band. They might have some skills they're still learning, but most of the skills they will have learnt. And they will have learned pretty much all of the skills in the lower bands. A student who is in the early stages of a band or around halfway, the teacher can target their learning on the skills in that, skills and concepts in that band, because they're probably still learning a lot of those skills and concepts in that band, but they can do most of the skills and concepts in the bands below. So this is how we demonstrate the learning. So again, this is how we actually then demonstrate and help teachers identify where students are at in their learning, and we help them set learning targets. So this is an example for next steps. Students, the teachers, so the actual descriptions themselves are really long and have a lot of detail to them, but this is an abbreviation. So we can see here that there's different descriptions at different band levels, and teachers can use those to set learning targets for students. And they can teach to that. Now, there are other types of data that we report as well. Things like percentiles and stanines that help rank student performance. These can be useful, but they're really only useful comparing students to other students. They don't describe what is actually happening in the learning. And what they don't do is help you demonstrate growth. A student who has a percentile of 50 in one test and then a percentile of 60 in the next test has not grown 10 percentile points. It's just they've performed better against a different norm reference cohort the second time. It doesn't tell us about the teaching and learning. So this here is an example of that, where the student is generally an average student. They have done a progressive achievement assessment every year for 5 years. Their percentiles are around 50 most years. Their stanine is in the 5th stanine. So that's another way of ranking students. This doesn't, just on these numbers, it doesn't look like they've progressed. But when we actually look at the scale score, we can see that they've progressed quite well. So they've gone from 103 to 108 to 116 to 123 to 129. Which then when we look at the bands, we can see over those 4 years of learning that they've actually progressed almost 3 achievement bands. So that's progress. So when we're talking about learning growth, there are different types of learning growth. So individual growth is the simplest one, is to look at a student's 2 test results. So we take the difference between their most recent test result and say a test result from a year earlier. We can also do that with cohorts of students. We can look at the average growth. So we can take the average of a group of students from 1 year to the next, and that will describe their growth. One of the better ways to look at learning growth is relative growth. So this is where you match students who have similar starting points. They have maybe their first progressive achievement test, they've achieved the same band. And then in subsequent years, what we do is we look at how their learning growth is compared. Have some students progressed faster than others? If so, why? And then what we can do is look at multiple years. And this is what we call growth trajectories. So what's quite a challenge with growth trajectories, the high performing students, sometimes their growth is a little bit flat because they're dealing with really sophisticated concepts and it's more difficult for them to show a lot of growth on the scale. But students who are in the middle or at the lower ends, they have opportunities to show really strong growth over time. Now, the one at the bottom, this is the one that scares all teachers. This is where the student has started low down on the scale and doesn't have strong learning growth. They stay down the bottom of the scale. This is the one that scares us all. What we want to see is the student who has a similar starting position and then they keep growing, they keep progressing. And this is how it's represented in our reports. We can see box and whisker charts which show the student group, and then we can actually highlight the student and their progress over time. This is very powerful because schools can use this to understand what is actually happening with students. Are they progressing? Are they progressing well? Are they progressing slowly? Is there something that they may have introduced that has helped student progress? Have they got a new teacher? Have they tried something different? What's working and what isn't? This is very, very good for schools. And so a big thing that we do as well is that we help schools understand the evidence. We help them understand the data. And we do that through our online platform. We have lots of self-help information. We have videos, we run webinars. There's a lot of information there that teachers can access to help them. We also have support through our offices. So it's not a thing where we expect schools to use the test and that's it. We're here to help. But what is so important is that when we're using assessment is that we make sure that our assessment can help inform teachers about where students are at in their learning, what their next steps are, and help teachers to be able to celebrate the progress of students over time. It's so important that we celebrate the successes of students and we help them learn. And we need evidence to do that. So, Terima kasih. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jarrod. Okay, so it's a very insightful speech. So we get the ideas about assessment and how the ideas of progressive achievement. And maybe all of you here have so many questions already, maybe about the process, how it's maybe the details of how the learning progression or the system of the assessments going on. Maybe you want to ask about that, or maybe more interesting is like, what is the benefit of having this assessment, especially for teachers? And I think it's really benefit for the institution as well, because they will see the overall process of the progression of the student there. But maybe you question like, what about the teachers, what to do, since we know the ideas of, let's say, differentiate learning is also make the teacher have a headache. So maybe you can pose that question to Dr. Jarrod about that. So let's open this session for a question. I will open for 3 questions first. We have around 10 minutes to have a question and answer. Anyone want to start? All right, so one first. Anyone else? All right, so I can start from, how come I forgot? Eka, oh my God, sorry. Is there any other mic or just this one?
All right. Thank you so much. Actually, I have 2 questions. The first one is, since we have this concept of assessing psychometric things, ability, and we consider the ability of the students, I'm curious why this modeling, the rush analysis, is not implemented well in Indonesia. What is the challenges? That's my first question. And my second question, we talk about tests on assessing the student's ability. But in the other hand, we need to keep tracking their progress. So is it possible to apply this modeling, assessing model to formative kind of assessment? Maybe that's all. Thank you.
Great questions. Okay, so the first one about the psychometric modeling. The truth is it's not commonly used everywhere because it does require quite a big research exercise to be able to develop instruments against those psychometric models. And the other piece is that there's probably a shortage of people in the world who have expertise in this area. And we know that in Indonesia, there are people who have this expertise. We have a wonderful psychometrician in our office who works on a lot of government projects and does implement these types of models. So it's certainly in Indonesia, but probably not, you know, we're probably leading the way in bringing it into Indonesian schools. The second question, and I'm so glad you asked this about formative assessment and can we implement these types of approaches in formative assessment. To be honest, I have a little bit of I don't want to say bugbear of mine. I have a little bit of all through my work in assessment, I've always found it interesting how people talk about summative and formative. My belief is that every good assessment will have some formative power, will have some diagnostic power. It's the teacher or the assessor who chooses not to use that power. They make it summative by saying, this is the score, and putting the test away. And for selection tests and certification tests, that makes sense. That's what they're there for. For achievement tests, this is not fair on the student. If it's a good achievement test, you need to take every ounce of the formative power from that tool and help the student. So that was a very good question because yes, every single one of our assessments, we're thinking about the formative as well as being more important than the summative use of it.
Okay, thank you for the answers. Anyone else want to ask question? Can I give to the ladies with the spectacles?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna. I came from Yayasan Penggerak Indonesia Cerdas. What I have in mind while Dr. Jarrod is presenting is in Indonesia, we know that students sometimes with the policy, I don't know if it's policy or not, that no child left behind, harus naik kelas gitu ya. Nah, what are we going to do with, I mean, it will be very interested if this was implemented in schools. And then me as a fourth grade teacher, I know what is my A like, I mean, maksudnya Angga misalnya gitu ya, a student named Angga, how does Angga like in third grade? And then I know from the cards, it's cards, right? The cards report. But what if this Angga student doesn't achieve the minimum requirement for the grade? What will we do? And then especially for sixth grade, right? When we go from elementary school to junior high school, which is probably a different, totally different schools, type of schools, how do we support this kind of students, even though we know, oh, this is what Angga achieved in 3rd grade or 6th grade. He needs, she needs more support from their teachers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's also a very good question. So when we're thinking about how we support, and I think it's fair to say that you're thinking a lot about the weaker students and how we can support them. Every teacher knows which students are the ones who are the weaker students in the class. But it's difficult to know exactly how to help them and where they need support without evidence. So we can keep teaching them the same, the grade 4 or the grade 5 curriculum, and we keep knowing that they're not understanding enough of it. But unless we gather evidence about the whole learning continuum, we won't necessarily identify what are the foundational pieces that they need to relearn that will help them catch up. And we see it a lot with, you know, I've been involved in policies like that with the No Child Left Behind type policy, and they only work when teachers are using really good evidence-based assessment tools to identify what the individual needs are of the students. Otherwise, it's too hard for the teacher to guess. Yes, and that's exactly how our progressive achievement assessments are developed, so that the teacher doesn't have to know, but the evidence will be there. It will show, just like, for example, oh, no, that's just weird. So, for example, where we had the report earlier, where we could see that there were 2 questions for number that were correct, and they were easy questions. That's exactly the type of evidence that the teachers are looking for. So, okay, there it is. Okay, so for this particular report, we can see here we've got 2 questions here that are number. The teacher will then know that is evidence, and that is because they're easy questions and they've got them wrong, that's likely to be a concept maybe from the previous grade level or the grade level before. That student needs to learn those 2 concepts. We can see that they can do a lot of other things, but there are 2 foundational concepts there that they don't understand and that they need help with. This is how we help students catch up, using evidence.
Okay, so I think we have one question from the online participant. I think, can I get the question? Thank you. So I'll read for you. The question is coming from Pak Wawan. So in your view, is there a paradigm shift in how to conduct learning assessments for current digital native students? That's the first question. Second, I think today's technology has the potential to facilitate assessment, which is not just learning outcomes, but the learning process. How does ACER develop an assessment? How does ACER develop an assessment that is based on students' learning? Yeah,
sure. Okay, so absolutely, what we're seeing in technology is the fact that we can actually now deliver these types of assessments. We've been doing them paper-based for 30 years. But since we now have a world where computers are in the classroom and students are digital natives, it means that we can use the online assessment, use computer-based assessment, which then gives the results back automatically to teachers. So the biggest advantage to that is actually being able to empower teachers to start helping the students and providing feedback and support immediately. And the way that we can structure the reports, it means that teachers can very quickly identify the evidence and the areas of need for the students. So even within an hour, the students can have sat the assessment for 40 minutes and the teacher can have been looking at the reports for the class for 20 minutes, and straight away they've already got some areas to work on with every single student. So that is really the power of it. And if you, it wasn't that many years ago, even just 5 years ago, where we weren't as able to use the digital platforms because schools didn't have computer access, or their internet wasn't strong, or students weren't comfortable using the computer. So all that's changed. Now, as far as advancing our assessments, what we do a lot more now is use adaptive testing. So this is actually where the difficulty of the test questions adapts according to the abilities of the students. And this gives us a lot more diagnostic, informative richness in the reporting and the evidence. And we are working on things like capturing other information around, what the student does on some assessments during, and particularly with some of the activities that they might be doing. You can model some of their thought processes and things like this. What did they actually do to work their way through a problem? And I think that's going to be something that we see more and more of down the track. But it is a developing space, and probably one where assessment's going to evolve a lot more because of that. But it's an exciting space to be working in.
Okay, thank you, Pak Wawan. Hope it's answer your questions. And due to the time constraint, I have to end the session, question and answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Jarrod, for the time and for the very insightful speech. And everyone, thank you. And I give the time back to the MC.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for the insightful presentation and also discussion, Dr. Jarrod. Have a big applause, please, everyone. Now, ACERxUIII actually has a special package for you, Dr. Jarrod. We kindly request the Dean of Faculty of Education, Prof Nina, to give the package to our keynote speakers, please. Thank you, Dr. Jarrod and Prof Nina. So we have completed our agenda today. Please be seated for the speaker. Yeah, Alhamdulillah, we have completed our agenda. We appreciate your presence and also attention. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.